Chào kawan, tôi là Alicia, and this is Alicia Learns Vietnamese, episode 3. I've got my name down here in what I think at least would be the phonetic spelling of my name in Vietnamese. I use the A with a hat because I think it's the closest to the schwa sound that we have in English. So that's that sound in like amazing, under, ugly, and I've got two of them in my name, Alicia. I think that the sound is similar because it comes kind of from behind your teeth, whereas the sound, like in ba or fa, ma, is a little bit more guttural, and I think it's a little different than the sound that we have in English. But if you have a different interpretation of the pronunciation, I would love to hear your feedback. I'm also wearing my Vietnam shirt today. They just won the SEA game, so that was awesome. Go Vietnam. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about all the things that make Vietnamese difficult. So last week we talked about all those things that actually make Vietnamese easier to learn in some ways than other languages. Today we're going to talk about all the things that maybe make you as a VLL want to pull your hair out sometimes because it is challenging. I hope that this video doesn't discourage anyone who's learning Vietnamese. I just got a comment actually on Facebook a few days ago from someone who said they really liked episode 2 and reminded me about this, something that is really true, which is that just looking at a task and thinking of it as easy rather than hard can actually make the task easier. So I kind of rethought making this episode because I really don't want to discourage anyone from learning the language. Just kind of wanted to make this, all in good fun and just to kind of laugh about some of the things that are a little bit of a struggle and maybe commiserate a little bit with other VLLs out there who might be struggling with certain things. So I'm going to jump into what I think so far have been the 5 most difficult things about being a Vietnamese language learner. The first one is something that I have talked about in episode 1 and 2, so forgive me for getting a little repetitive, but I think the fact that Vietnamese is a tonal language is probably the thing that makes it the most different from English, and it can be a big challenge. So I mentioned in episode 2 one example of a word that is pronounced, or if you change the tone on it, I should say, in the pronunciation, therefore, the meaning of the word changes. But there are so many examples of this. So I talked about la versus la. There's also vi versus vi. Another one would be ka. Ka versus ka, as in kai ka. There are countless examples of this where if you just change the tone, especially because Vietnamese is a monosyllabic language, so every word is just one syllable, so you can imagine you're counting a lot on those tones to define the meaning of words, can make it really difficult for people to understand you at times if you forget the tone or, just switch it around a little bit. Another thing that made my list of challenges in Vietnamese is the classifier. So that's something that we don't have in English. But in Vietnamese, you need to put before a noun the classifier that it falls into, kind of like the category. So for example, you have the word avocado, bơ, and you need to put in front of it the classifier for fruit, so quả bơ. If I just say, I like avocados, tôi thích bơ, that's okay. But if I want to say something about a specific avocado, tôi ăn một quả bơ, I need to put the quả there to say that I'm talking about that specific fruit. So, or that specific object, I should say. And it sounds straightforward enough. I think the biggest challenge with classifiers is kind of knowing what situations you need to use them in, and honestly, just memorization of vocabulary. There are over 120, I think, classifiers, and it's just a lot to keep track of. Another thing that made that list of on my top 5 are pronouns. There are so many pronouns in Vietnamese, and they're all related to age and your relationship with a person. So there's not only a pronoun for maybe an older person and a younger person. There I think 4 or 5 kind of different categories or different stages in life. There's a way that you refer to people who are about your age, someone who's like the age of your older brother or sister, and someone who's your parents' age, and then your grandparents' age, also male and female for each of those. And there are certain pronouns that just refer to someone who has a specific relationship to you. So there's a pronoun that you use only for your mom. And when you talk to your mom directly, instead of saying ban, which is just kind of the general form of the word you would only use the word me to talk to her. And then when you refer to yourself and you're talking to your mom, you would always refer to yourself as con, which means son or daughter. So my mom doesn't speak Vietnamese, so it's not something that I really need to use that often, but I thought that was really interesting. And pronouns in general, I think it's very interesting to learn about in Vietnamese, but it's something that's really challenging, especially because I think I'm really bad at gauging people's age in general, and I think maybe in Vietnam I'm even worse at it. So like looking at someone and immediately knowing if they're like roughly my age, or maybe like that older sister, older brother category, or younger sister and brother, that's sort of the area where I get a little bit mixed up and I'm not exactly sure how to refer to people. All right, next up on my list is the regional nature of Vietnamese, I guess is the best way to put it. But it seems like there are so many different ways to say absolutely everything. And it varies so much from the north of Vietnam, the central Vietnam. I live in Da Nang, which is in the center. And then in the south of Vietnam, there's so many differentiations of the pronunciation, the vocabulary. There are even new classifiers based on what area you're in. So that's something that's been really frustrating as I'm learning new vocabulary from all these different places online, these different resources. I never really know if it's Southern Vietnamese, Northern Vietnamese, and it seems like whatever I end up trying to use, people are always like, oh, they either don't understand or they know what it means, but they're like, oh, but here we use this word. And I have Vietnamese friends from all over the country, so even if I know the word that they would use here in central Vietnam, people will still tell me the word, all the other words for that same thing. And the accents also are so different in all those places, but I think even closer together, the accents vary a lot. My friend told me that, on the city side of Da Nang, on one side of the river, there's one accent, and on the beach side, there's a different accent. I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but it can be really difficult when you're really striving to improve your pronunciation, and everyone pronounces everything differently, so it's a little hard to know, what models to follow. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about kind of falls into that same category, I guess, of being understood and just talking with different people and getting a lot of different inputs. And that is that it's difficult sometimes to be understood as a Vietnamese language learner. And this is something that I had a little bit of a hypothesis about before, and I was watching a video on TVO where she kind of addresses this. And that is just sort of the relative absence of Vietnamese language learners. I think that as English speakers, for the most part, I think we've kind of gotten accustomed to hearing people speak English who English isn't their first language. So they might have a really strong accent, or they might not have fully mastered all of the grammar, but you can be a little bit flexible in your listening because you're kind of used to hearing that. So you adjust and you can understand what they're trying to say. And for the most part, I mean, there isn't that same dynamic in Vietnam, especially I think with older people. They're really not used to hearing people speak Vietnamese who aren't native Vietnamese speakers. So it's very difficult to kind of make that initial adjustment to understanding someone speak your language and not speak it perfectly. So that's something that I think has been a little bit of a hurdle, just getting people to be a little bit flexible in their listening skills as I'm trying to be, drilling that pronunciation and trying to be more be more fluent, but that has been a challenge as well. And it is disheartening when you've been studying so hard and practicing, and then you get that feedback and people are just looking at you like they don't understand a word that's coming out of your mouth. So I think those are all of the things that have been the biggest challenges for me thus far. I would love to hear from you if you think that you've got any secrets or tips on making any of those things easier for one, or maybe something that you have also found challenging. Feel free to comment below. If you need a little pick-me-up, go ahead and go back and watch episode 2 and hear all the things that actually make Vietnamese easy. I don't want anyone to get discouraged. So keep studying, and I will do the same, and I'll see you guys back here next week. Tạm biệt.